Hey everyone, my name is Matt Baker, and for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to give a brief overview of psychedelics. I was trying to think of something I could talk about that would be interesting, and this is the first thing I came up with, and yeah, so let's see how this goes. Well, what are they? I thought a good place to start would be with a look at the etymology of the word, right? So it's derived from two Greek words, psyche and delein. Those mean soul or mind and manifest. And so really psychedelics, sort of a literal translation is soul manifesting. Just kind of an odd phrase, right? But the implication here is that psychedelics can access the soul and develop unused potentials of the human mind. Socrates, actually, and Plato and other Greek philosophers from that time participated in something called the Mysteries of Elysius. I'm not sure how to say that exactly. My Greek isn't really great. But what they would do as part of these ceremonies is they would consume a potion made of ergot, which has a chemical structure related to LSD or acid. Some of you might have heard of that. And there's actually some speculation out there that Plato and his metaphysics, his sort of dualistic metaphysics, where the ideal forms of things existing in a world beyond our senses, might have had its origin in this kind of ergot intoxication. Certainly plausible. The mystical elements in Plato are sort of well known. Anyway, psychedelics, experientially, they cause perceptual distortions that can cause hallucinations, illusions, and altered states of consciousness, right? A little bit different from other kinds of drugs like cocaine and heroin or stimulants and opioids. Psychedelics, they really, as I've said, alter your ordinary experience, right? It's sometimes compared to forms of consciousness that you may have heard of, such as trance or meditation, ecstasy or dreaming. Some people even recount experiences that they say are sort of near-death experiences, kind of really out there or, quote-unquote trippy experiences. And that word trip, actually, I don't know where it comes from, but it's sort of a slang word used to, I think, sort of denote the experience of going on a journey. I can tell you from my own experiences with some of these substances, it really is like going on a journey or going on a trip, a journey inward, and it can be very intense. These drugs are safe, medically speaking. I've never heard of anyone dying as a direct result from taking the drugs. Now, if they did something stupid and jumped off a building, these occurrences are pretty rare. They do happen. People who do, they can have sort of psychotic breaks. These are powerful medications or drugs, not to be toyed around with. They should be really respected. In fact, there are a class of drugs that are they're in the U.S. They're classified as Schedule I drugs, right? They're illegal, and so they're classified in the same way that like cocaine is. And yeah, let's keep going. Possible health benefits. Right, so there's been a lot of research recently into using what are called microdoses of these substances to treat different kinds of ailments such as PTSD, depression, and there have been studies. There's a lot of kind of controversy right now about whether these drugs are actually doing what they say they're doing, but I'm not overly familiar with a lot of those studies. I just know that they are sort of taking place. Okay, let's see. There's different types. LSD. This is usually comes in a form called blotter, which is like it's a sheet of paper dipped in the substance and then dried and then cut into small squares. Other times it's dropped onto sugar cubes or crackers. Yep. Mushrooms. Probably heard of these magic mushrooms. Completely organic. MDMA, otherwise known as ecstasy. PCP, otherwise known as angel dust. Ketamine, special K. Mescaline, that's derived from a cactus. And there are others. There are some pretty exotic ones. I think I remember hearing about there's a toad somewhere, I think somewhere in South America, that if you lick the back of the toad, you'll have a pretty intense experience from that. I thought this would be interesting to talk about the structure, the way this kind of works, or many of these chemicals work, is because their molecular structure is very similar to human neurotransmitters. And here on the left, you see norepinephrine. This is like a normal thing your body produces, and mescaline is similar to that chemically, and this is why many of these drugs are taken up so readily by the brain. Almost all hallucinogenics contain a nitrogen in their structure and are therefore considered alkaloids. That's pretty nerdy. I don't think anyone really cares about that, but I thought it was interesting. And more nerdy stuff there. Okay, history. Psychedelic drugs are among the oldest used substances by people. This is true. They have a long history of traditional use in medicine and religion. They have this perceived ability to promote physical and mental healing. Native American practitioners using mescaline still goes on. In fact, there's a scene in the movie Young Guns where the Indian character, I can't remember his name now, but there's a whole mescaline trip scene in that movie. It's kind of cool. And it's a pretty good movie if you're into Westerns. And let's see. Yeah, there are reports of success in using psychedelics to combat and treat alcoholism. Like I said, the jury's still out about the actual effectiveness of these things, but they are being used in this way. Mushrooms are used oftentimes for different sort of ritual practices, divination, healing. Ayahuasca, you may have heard about. There's been a lot of talk about ayahuasca lately. Otherwise known as DMT, which is probably stands for some long chemical name that I'm not familiar with, but this is really big in Peru and different kinds of religious festivals. It's common practice down there. There's not really a taboo from what I understand around this. And yeah, shrooms were known by the Aztecs as I don't know what their word was for it, but it translates into God's mushrooms, or the flesh of the gods. And the Spanish, when they came over, they thought that the mushrooms allowed the Aztecs to communicate with devils, right? So I just think that's interesting, right? The Aztecs are saying, oh no, we're talking to gods, and the conquistadors are like, no, you're talking to devils. So anyway, yeah, psychedelics became really popularized in the 60s. And, I mean, I wasn't around, but you see it in movies and you hear about it. And they're still with us today. They're just not as prominent. My personal experience, well, I've always been I've tried many of these substances with different, and had a wide variety of experiences on them. Like I said before, these are not, I have used them recreationally. They can be used recreationally, but these are not to be treated lightly, right? These can really render some extremely intense experiences. Speaking from experience, in fact, it was about 12 years ago or so, I had what's called a bad trip. It's very intense, and had sort of a psychotic break from that for about 6 months, and it actually led to me. I can directly point to one of the reasons why I became a Christian was because of this experience, and there's more I could say about that, but I won't. But yeah, these are really interesting experiences. They have a long history. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I think I'm running out of things to say. But, well, Baudelaire, there's a French philosopher called Baudelaire who wrote an entire book called Artificial Paradises, recalling his own experiences with the drug. There's not a lot of written accounts of experiences with these drugs, but they're out there. And Timothy Leary popularized this stuff in the 60s. And there's a guy, Aldous Huxley, and he wrote probably the most famous book on the psychedelic experience called The Doors of Perception. And so I pulled a quote from that I figured I'd share with y'all just to kind of close this time out. I'm already 2 minutes over 10 minutes, and I don't want to bore you to death with this stuff. So I'll just read you this quote. "I am not so foolish as to equate what happens under the influence of mescaline or of any other drug, prepared or in the future preparable, with the realization of the end and ultimate purpose of human life, enlightenment, the beatific, I don't know how to say that word, beatific vision. All I'm suggesting is that the mescaline experience is what Catholic theologians call a gratuitous grace, not necessary to salvation, but potentially helpful and to be accepted thankfully, if made available. To be shaken out of the ruts of ordinary perception, to be shown for a few timeless hours the outer and the inner world, not as they appear to an animal obsessed with survival, or to a human being obsessed with words and notions, but as they are apprehended directly and unconditionally by mind at large. This is an experience of inestimable value to everyone, and especially to the intellectual." So, if you like that book, if you like that quote, it's a really interesting book. I think you can probably find a PDF, a free PDF of it online. I think it's in the public domain at this point. Could be wrong about that. Anyway, yeah, I've talked for long enough, and I need to wrap this project up, so cheers.